Husson University officials have been on the search for their new president after Dr. Robert Clark announced he would step down from the role last year.
And of course, that's not an easy task, but luckily they already had a phenomenal candidate right at the university. Let's introduce you to Lynne Coy-Ogan.
Education has a tremendously transformational power.
In October 2023, Dr. Robert Clark announced he will step down this year from his role as president of Husson University. Now, after a months-long search, it's been announced that Lynne Coy-Ogan will take the torch as the new president of the university.
I was actually born in Bangor, so I grew up in Maine, went to Foxcroft Academy, and then went to Boston as an undergraduate student, and then on to Johns Hopkins for my master's degree, so lived both in Boston and in Washington, D.C., and then returned to Maine over 25 years ago.
In 2005, she became dean of the School of Education at Husson and then rose to provost in 2009, living out her dream in education.
My entire life I wanted to be a teacher, and so I've had the privilege of working from elementary school to graduate school, so seeing that entire span of the lifetime and the impact that education can have in transforming student lives has been a wonderful experience.
And not only is she assuming a vital role as the 7th president of Husson University, but she is making history. Coy-Ogan is the first female president in the 125-year history of the school.
It's a tremendous privilege. While I may be fortunate to be the first, I know I won't be the last. And so I think serving as a role model to students has always been a career goal of mine, but certainly to be appointed as the first female president of the university is a tremendous honor.
A few of her favorite things during her time at Husson so far is experiencing the growth and expansion to many academic programs. However, being in the position to impact lives every day and set an example for others takes the cake.
So it's certainly a pleasure to be selected as the 7th president of Husson University.
Coy-Ogan will assume her role on July 1st.